So anything you say or do may be held against you. And I'm going to mute everyone. That'll include Dave and Brett, so you'll have to unmute yourselves again.
All right.
All right.
You hear me?
Kick it off, Dave. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, everyone. I'm David here, hiding in my little office in Tauranga. So what we thought we might do for the next hour or so is just talk about getting away from Matamata. So for those of you who are dialing in from way down south, you might learn something, who knows? But this is very much aimed at sort of those first steps beyond the local area around the Matamata airfield. So that's a picture of Jury. I don't know why I used that, but there you go. So why is this not moving, Tim? There we go. So yeah, as I said, aim for spreading wings from the best club in the country. That's just my view. So we're going to do this in three parts. One is heading north on the ridge. The second is Brett's going to talk about the swamp. And Tim is going to talk about heading south from Matamata. So that's sort of heading down towards Tokoroa and those sort of areas. So what I want to, it takes a second for these to load up by the looks of it. This is a sort of flight that we see fairly typical on the OLC from various club members of ours. So that's a little flight out of Matamata here, starting here, up onto the ridge, beating up and down between the road crossing to Tauranga and sort of Mount Tiara. Fairly safe, nursery slopes here, hills are quite high, see that fairly frequently. But the question, I guess, is how do we extend that? How do we go past Tiara? How do we get up to Thames? And if we can do that, then how do we get even further? And how do we get?
Don't worry about that right now. Here you go.
Who's that? How do we get up to the Coromandel? And then after that, how do we get even further? So I want to talk really about this Thames area because that seems to be the bit that gets a bit squeaky for some people. So here we are, just a bit of orientation. That's Mount Tiara here. There's Pyra, there's Thames, there's Coromandel. So this is a stretch for Kaimos that I guess becomes, and certainly was for me when I was starting, reasonably challenging. This is the Turahere Spur. So for most people, ducking around the corner from Tiara, Tim lands here fairly frequently, but ducking around the corner of Tiara and up towards Turahere, not too hard. But the next step is really to plunge off across the Waihi Gap and up further on up the Coromandels. I think the thing to keep in mind here is as you start moving north from about here somewhere, the hills start getting lower. So your whole sort of working band starts to get a little lower to the ground. And that's, you know, at the starting can be a bit disconcerting because when you've been back further south down here somewhere, you know, the hills are 2,500, 3,000 feet high. The ridge works well. You can plot along at 3,500, 4,000 feet without too much trouble. You come around Tiara, these things are nearer 1,500 feet high. And then you get into these and your working band sort of tends then to drop to sort of, I don't know, 2,500, maybe 1,000 feet to 2,500 feet. On a good ridge day, you know, westerly wind in here, these hills all work. So shouldn't be too much fun. You just got to keep your mind on the fact that you're going to be running along at a lower altitude. A couple of things to keep in mind. Try not to go down these great big valleys to the back. This one here and this one here. They're a long way back. Wind tends to funnel down here and you'll find it's very hard to get all the way back out around the front again, especially true on that one. So we're working along these front ridges along the front here. So from here, Turahere Spur, cutting across here, we're into what we call the Pyra Bowl. That works pretty well in a westerly wind, no great challenge. And then we're stepping our way through here into lower hills. The bit that I think gets a bit challenging is this piece in here around Thames, particularly if you're starting to think about going around the corner. My experience, and people can tell me if I'm wrong, but is that the wind speed tends to drop off once you get into here. These hills are quite low, and you're getting into here and you're going, well, this has been great, 20, you know, 22 knots, 18 knots, and you get to here it's about 12. And I think the reason, and I stand to be corrected, I think the reason is that at this point, the wind's running up this valley here, and it's also running around the corner here, and we just get quite low wind speeds around this Thames area. So the question is, should I push on or should I not? And at that point, we're sort of starting to look for wind indication, and there are some really quite good ones around here. The how a river runs down through here. You can actually see the wind blowing across that river if it's anything like a westerly. But the other big one is the Firth of Thames, and you'll see the wind blowing across the Firth of Thames and all the usual stuff, smoke and fires and various other bits and pieces. So it's this piece in here that can quite often stop people. You get to here and go, heavens, it's not working very well. What am I going to do next? Once you move around here, there's actually quite a good ridge that runs up through here. And it's in gliding range of us if you're above 1,500 feet. It's in gliding range of the Thames airfield. I'll come back to Thames airfield in a minute. But you're out of sight of it, but you're around the corner. It tends to funnel quite well into this face here. And at this point, you can normally climb, and then we're starting to look heading further north. What have I missed? And then the piece going north is quite exciting because there is nowhere to land along this here comfortably. You'd break something in the process of landing. I'm not aware of anywhere up there to land. But you're reliant purely on the wind blowing across the Firth of Thames. It's a big catchment. It's a big fetch into these hills. The wind really has nowhere else to go. We're working along the front of these. Try not to go into the backs. I've done it once or twice, but it's a long way forward. So we're working along the front pure and accepting the fact that as we go further north, we are reliant on ridge lift because there aren't too many other options really. Until you get around the corner here and there's an airfield at Coromandel. And again, I'll come back to that one. I'll pause if anyone's got any questions. I can't see the chat, but
no questions yet.
Okay, I'll keep going. That's easy. So then we start heading around the corner and up further up. Actually, my map's cut off the top of the Coromandels. And we've done this a few times. I don't know if many of us have done it much more than twice or three times, but clearly you're going to get to here and you're going to fall all the way back onto this ridge here. And that's easy-ish. It's the coming home part that's a bit more challenging because essentially you're going to have to push all the way into wind to get around the corner. And on the occasions that we've done it, there's usually been a bit of a cloud streak running off the corner here. I think the wind hits the corner, wraps around, and you get some sort of reasonably buoyant air through this point here. But again, those of us who have done it have normally had engines, which has given us a bit of a backup. We haven't ever had to use them, but the day will come when we will, or someone will, and that will bring me to the Coromandel airfield in a minute, and I'll come back to that. Couple of things to keep in mind in terms of traffic and airspace once you get past the Waihi Gap, so way back here. There's a CFZ, Bay CFZ, Tauranga CFZ, which pokes out into here. And then you've got a peninsula one that covers all this area up here. This one's a bit of a pain. Tim, if you're on, with the changes to airspace, are they likely to change the CFZs, do you know?
I do know they're probably not going to change.
Okay. Well, that means that you're effectively changing from Matamata CFZ to the Bay CFZ to the peninsula one in the space of a short piece of time. Know your radio frequencies. They are CFZs. It's not a mandatory thing that you report, but I would point out that this Waihi Gap in here gets quite a bit of powered traffic to the point where I nearly collected one afternoon. And they're flying from Hamilton through here, across the flats and the bottom end of the swamp and through the Waihi Gap and out to the coast, or they're coming down from Auckland right across the middle of the swamp and out and through here. Particularly if there's clouds on the tops of these hills, they tend to come through the gap. So you'll get traffic transiting through here. This is like VFR traffic who aren't particularly good at looking out their windows. And so you'll need to keep your eyes open. So it's probably useful to monitor the CFZ if at the least, or secondly, make some calls and let them know where you are. And there's traffic around the Thames airfield a bit as well. The problem with the peninsula is you get an enormous amount of traffic coming out of Pawanui and what's the one up the top here? I can't remember its name. So you just sort of have to listen carefully. It also picks up some of it. Yeah, that's right. And you get a bit of traffic coming off the back end of the Hanuas here and towards here as well. So you just got to listen carefully. But that's the airspace. The top end of the airspace in most of this area is 4,500 feet. If we're running the ridges, you're never going to need it. It's as safe as houses up there all the way to the top. There's no real airspace issues whatsoever. What else did I have in terms of notes? The other big thing to watch for in here is the sea breeze, and especially in the summer. You're going to have a lovely westerly day happening down here, and you're racing along, all's going well. And I can know this from personal experience because I've landed here twice. But in the afternoon, you're getting, the swamp in this area starts pulling in all the sea air through here, and so you can get into a sea breeze situation up here. Or the wind direction changes to a northerly, and at that point, life can get a bit challenging in terms of getting out. Hence, I've landed at Thames more than once. If I just scoot forward, so Thames Airfield, just quickly for those who haven't been up there or haven't landed there, there's a nice, great big long runway in this direction up here. You can also land this way into wind. If it's blowing a reasonable southwesterly, I guess the question is why on earth are you landing here anyway? Because the ridge is just behind here. But the more likely one is you get caught in the sea breeze or a northerly and you get low and around Thames Township. And at that point, you're going to look to land probably on this vector here. Thing to watch, this is a poo pond, so don't undershoot. It'll be a pleasant experience. Secondly, there's actually quite a big bank along the edge of this poo pond, which is retaining it. And I'll go a bit lowish and you had to hop over the bank before you got on the runway. So just keep those two things in mind. Otherwise, it's not a particularly busy airport. It operates on the Peninsula CFZ, I think, and it's more than adequate to land on, so no problems there. Yeah, someone's mentioned that there's the occasional paraglider traffic in the gap. That would be correct. Let me go back to the gap. This is in this area. You get a bit of around these areas, around on the hills here, and especially to the south, a little less up here. Actually, while I might just pause on this, the other issue in here upcoming is if they build the wind farm, it's going to we're going to have to think differently about how we cross this area, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. The turbines are likely to be 500 to 600 feet high, which is exactly our operating band in here. But as I say, they haven't got permit yet to build them, and it's a slow process. So the longer it takes, the better. So that's Thames, and that's Coromandel. Again, if it's blowing from the west, the mountains are up the back here. You're likely to be landing, well, if it's a northerly, I don't know why you're up there, but if it's a northerly, you'll be landing this way. If it's a westerly, it's probably the same as well. The runway is about 500 meters wide. It's about 40 meters, 500 meters long and about 40 meters wide. It's the only bit that I'm not sure about is that I think this grass on the edges of the runway isn't mowed all the time. And that would be especially true in late spring. So just watch out because it might prove to be a reasonably narrow footprint right in the middle here for powered traffic. But last time I looked at it midsummer, you had all 40 meters to use as the grass had probably dried out or they'd cut it for hail silage.
Well, last time I looked at it, David, I couldn't have landed there without ground looping. So
there's plenty of grass. Yeah, okay.
It had about a bit more than the wheel width all the way down, and then probably half a meter grass each side.
Well, so, there's a few other paddocks around here, but
paddock next to it's good.
Yeah, it is. And sorry, I've gone the wrong way. But yeah, so there are some options around there, but that's the most that's the resident runway. For those, let me go the other way. For those people who land out in here, it's about a 2-hour retrieve from Matamata, or 2 hours to get to you. And it's about an hour up to Thames. So neither of those are particularly long retrieves, particularly the one from Thames Airfield. So that's probably me, unless anyone's got any questions. That's the ridge. I don't think I was going to add too many more. Anything I've missed, Tim? Brett?
It's probably worth mentioning. I'll go, Brett.
Oh, the only thing I'd add is that the days when the sea breeze is ruining the westerly, there's normally very good convergence over the hills. So if you get high enough, just head into the hills and you'll get home easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you get a very big convergence set up across here. A bit of a westerly here and a northerly, but this can be quite good and through here. Talk to the jury guys. I mean, they often use that to get home. I'm sorry, you were going to say?
The other thing to keep an eye on is the wave from the other side, and it can be dumping on those ridges north of Thames.
Yeah, I haven't struck that myself, but yes, you're right. There's a ridge in here, westerly going over here, bouncing up and potentially having an impact on the Coromandels as possible.
Yeah, you usually know reasonably early but
Yeah.
it's something to just be aware of. And if you track up past Thames and it's not working for some reason, like you would expect,
Come back.
don't continue on.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that. One of the things is that this big area of water in here is actually, it's very, very easy to see both the wind strength and the wind direction. It's surprised you can get around here and sometimes it's just dead flat in the middle here, at like a mill pond. You think, maybe I won't go any further. But if there's movement on the water from the west, the air's really got to go here and up and over these hills. It can't really go anywhere else.
Georgia asks, how far north can you go?
Need
a better
way
picture.
up here. Can we see that one, Tim? So we've been to the top of Port Jackson. And it would be interesting to see whether we can get high enough here to drop off into, what's the island out there? Great Barrier Island, which is a bit downwind, but about 20 k's, in which case you'd have to climb up in the wave behind Great Barrier to come back, I think. We haven't, no, I'm not aware that anyone's done it.
Channel Island, I think, is the one that has been used as a turning point by, what's his name from Tauranga, probably no longer gliding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Iggy. We saw when we were up there, we saw Channel Island. If we bothered to climb in the pressure wave in the front of us, I can't remember what that hill's called, then yeah, you could have probably run out to Channel Island and come back.
Well, that time I nearly did. I got about 5 k's short of it, but
yeah,
I gave myself a big fright coming back. When we left, we were about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 feet. We're off the tops, and I just reciprocated on the way back foolishly, thinking it was the way back. And you get there at it was about 12 or 1,400 feet above the sea when I got back to the hills, and I realised the hills actually started well upwind, and I had to fly in horrendous sink to get onto the hill. So that kept me quiet for a little while on the way home.
Yeah, we noticed. I was going to say, there is on the chat, there's a suggestion that someone has flown out there and back. If they have, well done them. That's quite an effort.
Yeah, I think Neville Cameron's landed at Great Barrier Island.
Oh, okay.
You can fly there, but I think he caught the ferry back or had an aero tow back, something. Yeah.
There is
it was an aero tow. He got aero towed back.
Okay.
So.
Claris International Airport's quite good. But look, let's come back to square one, and that is, this is very much a thought about how do we extend past Mount Tiara for those who haven't done it, up to Turahia, and then make our way further north up towards Thames and back is really what this is about. And there's plenty of people on the airfield that have done it frequently, so talk to them, but it's easily doable in almost every club we've got. Reasonably free. It's a good sell we're staying. Tim, I wasn't going to add too much more than that. I've used up for 20 minutes. So
one area I used to get stuck on a lot was coming back from Thames, and usually I'd find I can get to Thames reasonably easily because you've climbed up at Tiaraha, you've got 3,500 feet, and you slowly lose it as you get up to Thames, and you're down 2,000 feet. You get to Thames 1,500 feet, you find the wind's not super strong, then you're heading back south.
Yep.
And you can see on your track there, you've got two paths, one slightly further back and one out the front.
Yep.
So how do you choose which way to go? Stay out the front really low or go back a bit further? How do you decide what to do there?
So both those tracks are actually tracks going north, and these ones, this one and that one, there's a blue one under there, are both coming south. And the reason being that when you get off the end of these hills, you're often not high enough to actually go that easily back. So you tend to run along the hills at the front. Again, it comes back to the issue that if the wind's blowing reasonably consistent across the Hauraki Plains here, there are hills, low hills along the front here, and you have to trust the fact that they're going to work. Otherwise, you've got to trickle all the way back into here, which isn't actually all that easy at times and quite slow. So does that answer it? I think the other point that's probably worth making, which I forgot, the one that comes challenging is how do you get back from Pyro back over the Turahia Spur? As I mentioned earlier, there's a big bowl in the back of Pyro here, big grassy one. You'll tend to be below the tops when you get into the bowl quite often. So if you're attempting to circle in that bowl, it's quite tight. then all of that instructor training around turning into the hill and whether you should or shouldn't and what it does to your horizon and whether in fact figure eights might be a whole lot safer in that sort of environment if you get well above the tops needs some thought, because it's quite easy to turn into that grassy bowl hunting some lift and realize that you've dropped all your airspeed off. So keep that front of mind when you're working in that area. But once you get up above, well, in the early days, probably 2,500 feet in the bowl, then tracking across onto Turahia Spur again is usually okay. It's often actually quite buoyant in that open bowl area on the Waihi Gap, and it's a little hard sometimes to work out why it is, but it's almost invariably reasonably buoyant. Keep in mind, it's a bit hard for me to zoom in here. That's the Turahia Spur. You want to be on these hills behind it, not out in the middle, because you're likely to get some dumping off the back of these hills. So you're up along the bush line here and then into that big grassy area where those pig farms and power pylons. Keep in mind, there are power pylons in here, so you don't want to be too low. But yeah, Tim, as I say, you'll often come further out on your way south again, simply because, as you've said, you've left Thames at a reasonably low altitude.
I've only ballsed up crossing the Turahia Spur to the south once and had to
Run back.
where I found I just didn't have enough height and had to turn around and go back to Pyro and climb up a bit higher.
Yeah.
And what's the lowest you guys would ever leave Pyro?
About 1,400 feet is as low as I'd even entertain it. But what I would say is, in a medium performance glider, I'd want 2,000 feet. But once you've climbed up in the Pyro Bowl, I find that if you track right out over towards Pyro Township itself, you either get more lift all the way out or you get zero sink until you're well out, and then you break left and go head for the hill and the saddle of the Turahia Spur. And if you hug the Karangahaki Gorge Hill on your left as much as you can, it can be turbulent going through there because there's a dumping off the upwind part of the Turahia Spur. But if you keep close to the hill, lots of speed, the air's got to go somewhere and it generally goes up. So I've never not made it doing that, and I've left at ridiculously low altitudes sometimes and just climbed up along there where you wouldn't think you would. But always have an out. The landing is all good in there. There's a basin in approaching the saddle, and you can just drop back and land straight into wind on any number of paddocks in there, bearing in mind it will be turbulent because of the dumping off the hills to keep your speed up, but the nice paddocks into wind. So.
There's a couple of comments on the chat function. I don't know if you can see those. 1,800 feet, I tend to leave the bowl at about 1,800 feet in my aircraft. And Brett's exactly right. There tends to be quite a bit of pressure and just off the front of the bowl, probably just to the south of Pyro Township, which is either zero sink or it's surprising how often you can climb in there. And then the rest of it makes sense. Someone mentioned cross the power lines at the poles. Yes, be very, very careful with those high tension power lines over the Turahia Spur, because whilst the big cables you can see, there's actually a very thin cable strung from the very top of those poles, a single one from pole to pole or from pylon to pylon, right on the top. So just keep your eyes open before you drop over them. Look, I think I should stop there and move on to Brett.
Okay. You can hear me? Cool.
Yep.
Okay, I'll just share screen. You'll see that? You got Google Earth, guys?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Right. One thing that I would also mention about getting across on the ridge was, where are we? Ridge looks very messy back there. There are power pylons all along here too on the front hills. I've always found a really good track coming back, because coming back you're low, and generally I'm around maybe the 1,000 to 1,500 feet mark from about here around the front hills is if you follow over the top of the power pylons, it's generally a very good track to follow. So, okay. Right, now my little segment's on actually getting out of Matamata airfield and heading north on a thermal day. So I start my flight planning on the drive over from Tauranga over the hill, and I'd come to the top of the hill is about 1,500 feet there. When we come down, we drop down to 1,200 feet, 200 feet there. So I take the temperature at the top and the temperature at the bottom, and I get some idea of the lapse rate. Basically, I've looked at SkySight and things, and that basically qualifies what I've seen. Now, if you look at Google Earth here and look at the elevations, which will be there on your screen, Waharoa is about 50 odd meters. And if you go north, there's hills up here, and like it's 100 meters there. Around Matamata Township, it's 60 meters. It drops down, there's two rivers there, okay? There's the Waitoa River there. I think the other one's a Waihau or something. And between them, leading up to there, it's just one big basin. So in the morning, you've got a pool of cold air sitting in here. It's on average about 20 meters lower than anything else. And all the katabatic winds overnight have just, all the cold air has just gone into there, and it sits. And even on a day where there's a reasonable sort of westerly, for example, that will just be a really thick boundary layer over this area, and the wind blows over the top. So I come over the hill and the wind's blowing, I don't know, 15 knots or something through over the top of the Kaimais, and I think, oh, good, it's going to be a good day. Look down on this cloud, and I think, oh, you get down there, and it takes about 2 or 3 hours for the sun shining on the ground to start mixing that air enough for it to break up and turn into a reasonable thermal area. So if you're away from Matamata early in the day, for example, competition days are a good example because they launch us in the air as soon as we can stay. Often the thermal conditions around here are pretty horrible, but you can see they're quite good up around Morrinsville and Waitoa, and the swamp's working. It takes a bit to get out of there. Sometimes you have to start early and just bite the bullet, or take a long tow and get a few Ks up north or up into the hills here where the thermal conditions are better, knowing that you can always, if you get low, you've got enough height to get back to the airfield. So if you're trying to get out of Matamata, and I find if I trickle along this, I think it's the Waitoa River, it generally is a thermal trigger, and you might not get thermals good enough to circle in, but it's reduced sink on the way in. Morrinsville, and I don't have an airspace map, that's right on the corner of airspace here, and I think it's 2,500 feet to the west of it, just on this very point about here. It's always pretty good thermal or in here, and it's when you're half the circle, you're only about 100 meters away from airspace, but you'll almost always get a climb in there until the sea breeze comes and kills it off later in the day. So that's always good to get your first good climb. Other than that, Tatanui Dairy Factory or Waitoa. Waitoa is a good one. That's enough to get you established, get into the swamp and get away. Other than that, if you can get onto the Kaimais and its convergence or this ridge work, you just go that way. That's the simplest way. We'll get to the swamp in a minute. If you're on a task and you've got a turn point like Rupehi or Ngatia, I've always found that by far the best way to get that turn point on a ridge day is not to go into here and then punch up, find a cloud street. It's on this way, get onto Araha as high as you can, and then jump off the Terahia spur, because there's invariably wave effects in a westerly in this valley. Okay, coming off, I call them the Wairingas. I don't think they call that. I think that's the Wairinga Valley there. But there's always wave effects, and often you can't tell there's wave there, but there's suppression and there's reinforcement of the thermals and stuff. Often along this, about the river here, there's a really good line or you can actually climb sometimes, jumping off the spur and going straight along here, hitting a turn point and then jumping in. So, so it's a good way to get in the swamp. Swamp itself, it's a peat swamp, it's dark, it's moist, it holds its moisture, so it's the same area that's getting warmed up every day, and there's low scrub and stuff which holds a good boundary layer of warm air of high surface tension, just sits here cooking up, and then at some stage you can see the first thermal pop, and then it's all on after that. It's a great piece of real estate. And so that's where you get your swamp monsters and get your kick off to wherever you're going, and you can come back to it. Conversely, you can see on how the height is, it's 5 or 6 meters. It's as low as anything around here. So the first thing it does when the swamp starts working is it creates a low pressure area very close to sea level. And that obviously sucks in the marine air from the Firth, the Thames, and creates your sea breeze, which is a double-edged sword because you can use the sea breeze. But it also, in summer, will on a daily basis kill all the lift in the valley, including the swamp, after a period of time. If you time it right, you get up and there's thermals everywhere along there. Often you get the best ones at the junctions there, like there's Finn's Corner, one of those, I forget which is low one, isn't it, David? As the warm air blows and triggers by hitting the cooler farmland. And I was talking about sea breezes, wasn't I? Often the foreshore around here heats up too, especially depending on if the tide is coming in. It's had a long time to heat up, and either the water will kick it off or the breeze will just kick it off, and there's often a good convergence line all the way along there. And I think the Drury pilots use that quite a lot. As the sea breeze comes in, it'll kill that off or just kick it inland. The sea breeze can be very insidious in that you can still see the cumulus clouds there, but it takes a bit of an experienced eye to see that they're affected by the sea breeze already. The bottoms start getting a bit ragged and ill-defined. And if, for example, the cumulus clouds up here aren't looking very flash, well, that actually means the sea breeze is way over here already because it drives in as a wedge. And unless you're high, you can't use any of this lift. You can look at it. If you're 1,500 feet over here, you're in a spot of bother. You have to run for the ridge or run for the foothills here and hope there's a sheltered area where the sea breeze hasn't penetrated yet to get away. But the thing is about the sea breeze, it kicks off convergences everywhere. There's invariably a convergence along the hills here. There's always convergence along the Wairinga type area, I call it. And the Hunuas have great convergence. There's always, I think that's Hotel Devon in there, isn't it? Yeah, it's Hotel Devon. Always a great climb in there. It's low. Look how low it is. It's 50 meters off the ground, where the hills around it are 150 meters sod, and it just cooks off. It's just absolutely brilliant. So you can generally jump from there to there, and the clouds will tell you what's happening. Back this way, we have what we call the Tihoe Gap here, and westerly sea breeze will pour through here into the valley. And if you're low, don't try and cross this area in the mid to late afternoon, because you will be visiting one of the farmers around here probably. So try to stick to hills. You've got to bear in mind airspace, because airspace is a consideration, but there's generally good convergence thermals all the way along there, past Morrinsville and onto the Cambridge Hills. But I'm probably starting to get into territory there. But don't forget, you've got wave, you've got convergences and sea breeze to use. Flicks are all brilliant up here. I mean, people that haven't flown in the North Island for a long time will be pleasantly surprised that the paddocks are better than they used to be in the old days. I mean, you only need 100 meters to stop a glider, so if you've got a 200 meter paddock, it's brilliant. And don't use brake feeding as much anymore out here. Things to watch, humps and hollows like You can just make out Hunston Hollow's paddocks here. I've seen a glider land across them. It wasn't pretty. I was about to land in the same paddock in the right direction, and he came in underneath me while I was downwind to it. Luckily, I got away, but I don't think he damaged his glider, but I don't know how he didn't. If you're low, look for cows that are going to be milked, either walking along a race or cow sheds. Great thermal sources if you're under 1,500 feet. That one there, I know it's a pond. What haven't I covered, guys? I haven't even looked at my notes.
Covered a fair bit of ground, I guess. Is there any questions? There's one, there was on the chat function about, what was it? When you're coming home at that height, what is your margin to decide to land out? I think that relates to the ridge. Same land out rules apply everywhere. Once we're getting down to 1,000 feet, you're starting to think about what you're doing. You do have a reliance that if it's a ridge day and it's been blowing all day and you're pretty confident, you can happily keep going if there's hills with ridge working to keep going.
Around this area, bear in mind that the you want to be on this side of the Waitoa River or whatever the river is, because it's going to slope down that way, and you're going to be into winds. I mean, the paddocks are good, just don't leave it. I mean, you don't want to be under 1,000 feet along here. So, but I mean, if it's working, I've never had any problems here. I've seen Tim land out there. Actually, I've seen Tim land out a lot.
Yeah.
But then I got to know Derek Shipley, and then things changed. Okay, any other questions? Right, okay, well, I'll hand over to you, Tim.
All right. Sharing begins. All right, I just made a couple of little thoughts about tracking south from Matamata and how to do it reasonably safely and what land out options we're looking at along the way. And there's a couple of weather traps you can get caught by as well, depending on what the wind's doing. So here's the two main routes I tend to follow. And I think you can clearly see it's basically following one side of the valley or going down the Cambridge Hill and Mangatautari there and staying on the higher terrain. Now, these two routes, you can, of course, and I do often cut across from one to the other. If you start heading down one route and find it's not very good, you might decide to change your tack for the day and go a completely different direction. So you can fly in the middle bit, but generally it's best down the hills. And of course, it depends what you're trying to do for the day. Often I find a quite fun route is to track down B, track straight south and come down the side of Lake Taupo there. And that's always, you're staying on high terrain. If you want to head over towards Taupo area and Centennial Park, then you'd trek down the Tokoroa way.
You all come down Route B and then cut across the forest to Tokoroa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that Kinley Forest area, which has got less and less forest as I've cut it over, but it's quite good country through there around the river and that. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah. Actually, it's a good point. You know, we often get convergences forming along that Mangakino forestry area, and they're often running east to west along there. So that can often work quite well. We often also get sea breezes just inside the airspace for the Tokoroa area, but quite often where those arrows are as well, just on that edge of that airspace there is often a nice convergence set up with the breeze coming in from Tauranga and Rotorua. So it's worth trying to get down to this area because you do get all those awesome convergences. And what can happen with the wind? If you've got any hint of westerly with the wind, you usually get the sea breeze coming over from the west coast later in the day. and it likes to funnel in through the lower areas between Matamata and the hills to the south, and flow its way towards, it's kind of forced up towards Tokoroa, because that's quite high elevation at Tokoroa, about 1,500 feet, but it's still a bit lower than the Mamakus. So you end up with the wind funneling through. It has to go somewhere, and it ends up being pushed through that Tokoroa area, and that whole area can blow out quite often. So if you head south, when you're coming back home, you often find you have to do big glides over Tokoroa to get out of there. So obviously get a JS1 or something like that. That's
Obviously, absolutely, obviously.
But no, the real trick is to climb up at Mangakino and these hills south of Tokoroa as much as you can, and then often once you get up towards Patara and T-Rail, you start getting back into the good air again, and some days it's just lovely all day everywhere, no problem. So let's have a look at Route A, trekking down the ridge, and obviously the key things I'm thinking about are where are my landing options as I'm trekking south. This is kind of my thought process. And a lot of these places aren't many options, so you need to know what the good ones are. And one of the main ones around the Fitzgerald Glade area here, there's quite a few good paddocks. So that is a hotspot and a nice base. You know, you've left the bottom of the Kaimais, you're trekking south, you've got the Fitzgerald Glade with the road going to Rotorua, so it's reasonably easy to find. That's got some good paddocks along the side of the road, and Joan Wine's airstrip, which I'll show you in a minute. As you trek south, you get to Litchfield, and that can get a bit problematic. One field I've found, which is right on the corner of State Highway 1, looks really good, and every time I drive past it, I look at it and think, yeah, I could land in there today. And you obviously can't count on it. Sometimes there's stock in it, sometimes they split it up, but that's a good option. Once you get a bit further, Tokoroa obviously, and then you get into the hills, and normally you don't want to muck around at Tokoroa, because I often find I've landed there a few times because you get the breezes coming in. So don't muck around at Tok. Get onto the hills further south as quick as you can. And there's a few good landing options around Atamuri. So Atamuri's a smaller circle there. I've landed there a couple of times, but it's got power lines and it's got the irrigation, the big sweeping ones. So you have to dodge a lot of things to land there, but it is possible. Trev Terry swears by North Atamuri there, which has got quite a few more paddock options, I believe. And another good option is West Atamuri, right beside the river there. There's flats created by the river, and they're lovely paddocks to land in, and I've landed there a couple of times. And so you can see you've got these stepping stones on the way down. You just always want to make sure you're in range of something. And let's have a real quick look at what that looks like. Is this the best map? Let's have a look at Google Earth here. So here's the road going over to Rotorua, T-Rail to Rotorua. And so that's how you can find Fitzgerald Glade. Here it is here. And the good paddocks, I think they're before Fitzgerald Glade. So
yeah, to the east.
there's a marae here. Just a bit further south, there's some really good paddocks lined up along beside the road, and I've landed there a couple of times. The farmers are friendly. A bit further south is Joan Wine's farm, and I believe the airstrip is right here.
Yeah, I've landed on that. It's good.
Yeah, I've never landed there. I always land on these fields, random farmers' fields instead of some, and it's an airstrip that I know. So those are great options. As you trek south here, I always see the KFC sheds, these sheds here in the middle of the valleys, and they've got nice fields around them. Has anyone ever landed there? Is it safe to do so?
No, I haven't. I've always been able to run out into the valley of, if you're in circuit height above the chook sheds, you've got plenty of height if you run out towards Pataru, and you can generally get a save out in the valley. So
yeah. So I tend to make sure I'm high enough before I get to there, and try and trek off to the next bit. Now around Litchfield area, the terrain gets quite hilly. Like it's really undulating, and it gets pretty hard to find good paddocks. That's why this field on the corner of State Highway 1 south of Litchfield is quite good. So Pataru's up here, we trek south along the road, there's the factory, and this corner here, got a big triangular paddock right here. That's all it is. You can check it out when you drive past. So that's a good option around that rather undulating terrain. And that's a nice stepping stone on the way to Tokoroa. Of course, you get towards Tokoroa, the airstrip's south of Tokoroa, so you've got to have enough height to actually get down there. And as you're coming down here, you normally you want to stick more towards the trees and the forestry areas. Tend to find the thermals are better over that side. What do you guys think?
Yep.
Yeah.
They tend to be turbulent, horrible thermals, but they're there.
It's worth
And if it's all blue,
the airfield at Tokoroa is about 200 to 300 feet higher than the town, surprisingly. So if you get low at the town, just keep in mind that you're going to have to go uphill to get to the airfield.
Yeah. Often you can see in this, even in the satellite photo, you see there's a little cloud puff over this little bit of forestry, and so that's often a good place to try and get something. But as I say, try not to hang out there because you end up on the ground if you do. So get onto these hills further south. And then you can see these paddocks here, North Artemuri that I was talking about. Lots of options in there, and these other ones. We used to call this the Valley of Death, but someone decided that's inappropriate, and it's now the Valley of Land Out Opportunities. And you can see these nice big long paddocks beside the river there. And so you have to be a little careful in here as well. Again, if you're on the hills, you're okay, but you get off the hills, you can get into trouble pretty quick. And the whole Artemuri Valley can become a bit of a problem sometimes. And the reason for that is you've got the river, that's the lowest point of that area, and the wind often can funnel down through the rivers, and that's the path it will follow, is following the river. So hills are good. Rivers usually, they might be a good trigger for thermals, but they might also be carrying a nice sea breeze. Let's have a look at the other side. So this is a bit easier. What's problematic is the easiest places to land are in the middle of the valley where the paddocks are, but the best lift is usually over the higher terrain and over the terrain where there's not as many land out options. So you need to be a little bit careful. Obviously, Hinuera, we used to have a big airstrip there. Now you just have to rely on paddocks. There's lots of paddocks around Pairiri. I've landed there a couple of times. It's a great option if you get caught out on the way home by sea breeze, that or Hinuera area, you'll find plenty of paddocks. You get to Mangatautri here. There's a really nice airstrip on the south side of Mangatautri. So I've landed there once. It's like landing on a bowling green in a beautiful park. Beautiful. It's a private airstrip, and the guy's a bit of an aviation enthusiast, so nice to land there. Bill's got some favourite lac paddocks down around north of the dam here, and they are big enough for landing anything in. So that's a really good option. Much easier to find than Whareipapa South. This whole area becomes quite undulating as well. There's a nice airstrip at Whareipapa South. And let's have a quick look at that.
You can never find it when you need it, though, Tim.
No, you can't. I struggle to
And
find
it's
it.
high, it's uphill. So,
That's right.
yeah.
It is hard to find. So let's zoom into this area. So getting to Mangatautari is normally fine. There's not a lot of landings around Mangatautari except for the one to the south. And then there's all these paddocks around here. You can see how this looks flatter. Bulmer's Landing. That sort of area there, there's heaps of good paddocks. And then you can see as you get further south here, oh, my computer's struggling to drive this page. Yeah, now obviously all you need to do is find Whareipapa South Airstrip in this.
You're 1,200 feet going down at 4 knots. No pressure.
That's right, exactly.
Come on, Tim, hurry up, hurry.
So here's Whareipapa South. There's actually a school and a little bit of a intersection with a shop or two. And then the airstrip, here it is, just off to the right of that intersection. Can you see it? And it's right next to the road. Here it comes. It's a beautiful airstrip, 2 vectors. Sometimes one is fenced off and there's sheep in one side, one vector, but usually this main one running east-west is available. So you want to be a little bit high to find that, and sometimes just having it on your GPS is really useful. So you actually can just head straight for it and trust that when you get there, there'll be an airstrip to some extent. There's not many other options around it, so you have to be a bit careful. As you head south, there's no real specific advice I can give on specific things to look for. You kind of start relying on finding airstrips. And luckily, as you head south, they become more and more numerous. So I often find when I'm tracking south here, I'll track down the Waikato River or near it, not too far away from it, where that sea breeze is funneling through. But that often triggers good thermals, and there tends to be more landings and airstrips around here that are reasonably easy to find. In closer to the hills, it gets more undulating and harder to find good airstrips. But you do become reliant. The further south you get, the more you rely on finding airstrips. So, how do you find an airstrip? What do you do, Dave?
I know you get quite good at looking for them, but if there was anything that marks them out, there's normally a track runs to the airstrip because they're going to get fert trucks in there to drop it off. The fert bin is almost, in fact, it's always at the top end of the airstrip. So land towards fert bin because you'll be landing uphill invariably. Yep. And the other thing about airstrips is they usually design them, not always, but they usually design them to face into the prevailing wind because the top dressing planes are going out in full load, tend to like to go downhill into wind. What that means, though, is that there's a fair probability when you come to land at one that you'll be landing uphill with a tailwind. So just keep that in mind. Now, it's not going to happen every time, but it does, I don't know, every time I land a bloody airstrip, I've usually got a tailwind. So.
Okay, I've spotted 2 airstrips in this picture. There's one here.
Yep.
Beautiful. And, you know, how do you know it's not a race? And the answer is usually a nice bin at the top. If it's been used recently, you'll get a nice white spread of the fert or whatever they use. So it's a bit of a skill to pick airstrips. And here's another one here. Again, a white bin at the top. It gets easier actually if you're in forested area because they stand out. But normally they're surrounded by other paddocks. Here's another one here. So as you head south down the western side of Lake Taupo, there are a lot of airstrips, and you start spotting them as you go. You have to be very careful, of course, that you can't rely on one being available. They've often got sheep on them, or they've been fenced off, or something. So you never want to rely on one, but as you're trekking south, like for example, if you're near Tihoi here, there's a nice airstrip near Tihoi. Oh, here's one here. There's usually more than one around the place within a local area. So,
Hey, Tim, can you increase your cursor size so as we can catch up with you a bit easier?
It's hard to see your cursor, mate.
all right, no, not easily, sorry.
Okay.
Tim, those airstrips, from Mangakino down the south side, the western side of Lake Taupo were built, I think, from memory by Land and Surveys a long time ago. So they tend to be good, really good, strong, long airfields. They were built for older aircraft. So those ones down that side, if anyone drives up the Western Access Road, you can see a couple of them. They're excellent, those ones.
Yeah. Here are some pictures. So this is Pairiri on the way home, where you'd start getting into trouble potentially if your glide's if you're not high enough. And you can see, so this is just north of Karapiro, where it has a big kink in the lake. And you can see there's lots of good flat sized paddocks down here on the right. Funny, by the Cambridge Hills here, there's not many options, are there, on the way home? So if I'm struggling to get home, I tend to veer more right, even though it's not a direct route, because there's more landing options to the right-hand side on the way home. Matamata's sort of straight ahead here. And you can see this big quarry here on the left. That's probably kicking off a nice thermal, but if you head there, you might end up low without any landing options. So got to always go for the landing options rather than relying on lift. This is roughly around Wharekapapa South, heading south. Might be looking at Wharekapapa South, or it's down to our right here or something. And you can see you often have to choose. The good landings are out to our left, but notice there's also lots of blue sky. To the right, up into the hills there, you've got the clouds. So it's always a battle. Do I go left and stay close to the safe landings, but I'll probably land out, or do I go to the clouds where it's more undulating terrain? And
See,
so
the sea breeze is almost certainly through there. Those clouds look shocking, don't they? Those near ones.
yeah, exactly. And so it's depressing when you know you have to push into these hills at the back here to get away. So if you start identifying this and identifying that these clouds look crap, sea breeze is probably coming in, try and identify that, keep moving and try and get over to the others as far as you can, while thinking about landing options all the way. So
It's
easy.
It's the fun bit.
Exactly. So are there any questions about that? Can I increase my cursor size? No, I can't. What do you guys, Brett, what do you do? Do you have a similar sort of philosophy as you're trekking south?
I use either A or B. I give myself more frights using the western route. Around Araheen is never kind to me, the Wharekapapa South area. And I tend to be quite slow. I get onto the base of the, what are those hills in there, Biotrahonga, wherever they are. Yeah.
For yours.
Yeah, well, Poru is probably always further south, but yeah, the close.
These ones?
Yeah, those ones, yeah. The Rangitotos, isn't it? Yeah. And if you get established on the Rangitotos here, and especially when the sea breeze just is arriving, it's brilliant. The convergence, you go straight across, it's really good. Getting there around the Araheen, it's just horrible country, really. It's so you really do have to watch where you're going to land, because I don't rely on fire up south, even with my flash moving map computer telling me where it is, because it tells me it's there. I look, I can't see it. But there's actually quite a good couple of airstrips in close on the base of the Rangitotos, just about maybe 5 k's further south than Wharekapa South. So around where the power pylons are, and I generally head into there and finally get away. But once you're established, it's really good. But going home, I'm in agreement. Get your last climb off those big hills here, and sometimes Tokoroa's or Kinleith is working, sometimes it's not. But follow the airspace line. Follow that airspace line close as you can on the way home, and then jump off when you need to.
Yeah,
that's the way I go home.
And I tend to do the same. And Brett's right, that airspace boundary, the curved one that runs through between the letter D and H and climb around here, and then kicks and heads direct to Wharekapa South at 6,500 feet to the south of there. It tends to be enormously frustrating because you run into the boundary and have to descend to 4.5. But yeah, you'll head as far up that airspace line as you can before you plunge off. Worth noting, Tim, for the future, that all of that airspace around there is subject to change, mostly in our favour. We probably shouldn't cover it too much here, except to say well, considerably easier in that Tokoroa through to Hinuera area, because up until now it's limited to 4.5, and we may well get access to 6.5, and that just gives you so much more comfort flying through that area.
Yeah, the new airspaces will be 6.5 throughout that whole pink area there.
Yeah.
If you open it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that another time.
Cool. I think that's all I had. Any final questions?
No? All right.
Great. Everyone knows what to do now.
Yeah, so it should be a piece of cake. It's not. It took the years. So look, thanks, Tim. Brett, the plan was to talk about Matamata and how to get out of here, and I can see on the screen a whole lot of fairly experienced people who'll be able to add some other bits and pieces in the future. But those are the 3 main corridors that we tend to use and the bits and pieces that we've experienced. Anything else? There's one chat comment, which I can't bring up, Tim. What is it? Thanks.
Neil says thanks.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay, if not, I'm not going to hold you up. I'm sure you've all got tea. I have. So we'll see you out whenever we get to lockdown 2.
And
Okay.
rugby.
See you later.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Rugby. Go the AVs.